The morning mist clung to the alien valley like a shroud, and Marcus Chun watched it rise from his cabin porch with the same quiet satisfaction he'd felt for the past 34 years. At 61, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of synthetic coffee, he looked nothing like the 27-year-old draft dodger who had stumbled into this place in 1969. Back then, the galaxy was still reeling from first contact. The Zephyrian Empire had made their presence known to Earth just 5 years earlier, and humanity was scrambling to find its place among the stars. For Marcus, who had fled the Vietnam War and the chaos of Earth, the opportunity to join a civilian research expedition to the Outer Rim had seemed like salvation. He'd never planned to stay. The valley stretched before him now, a patchwork of carefully tended fields and native purple grass. The three suns of the Kepler 442 system painted everything in shades of gold and amber. To his left, the irrigation channels he'd spent decades perfecting carried crystal-clear water from the mountain springs. To his right, his workshop hummed quietly, automated systems maintaining themselves just as he'd taught them. But it wasn't the beauty of the place that made Marcus smile each morning. It was the knowledge that he wasn't supposed to be here at all. The Zephyrian Empire had one absolute rule about this sector: no permanent settlements. The valley, like hundreds of others across their territory, was designated as a sacred migration route for the ethereal wanderers, a species of energy beings that supposedly traveled these paths once every generation. For 300 years, no one had questioned this law. No one had dared. Marcus took another sip of his coffee and remembered the day everything changed. It was 2058, just 3 years ago, when the Zephyrian patrol ship had landed in his wheat field. He'd watched from his porch as three tall, silver-skinned figures emerged, their elongated heads scanning his property with obvious confusion. Behind them came their human translator, a nervous young man named Phillips who kept adjusting his collar. "Sir," Phillips had called out, his voice cracking slightly, "you need to evacuate this area immediately. This is a violation of Galactic Treaty 447B. Marcus had set down his coffee cup slowly, just as he was doing now, and walked to the edge of his porch. At 58, he'd been leaner then, but his eyes held the same steady calm they did today. "I know what treaty you're talking about," he'd said. "Read it myself when I first got here." Funny thing about that treaty, though. The lead Zephyrian, whose name Marcus later learned was Commander HFY, stepped forward. When Zephyrians spoke English, their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Human, you will comply with evacuation protocols. The ethereal wanderer's path must remain clear." When was the last time anyone actually saw these wanderers? Marcus had asked. Phillips had blinked rapidly. That's not relevant. The treaty states that migration routes must be kept clear during active migration periods. Marcus interrupted. "I've been here 31 years. I've documented weather patterns, seasonal changes, electromagnetic fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. Want to know what I've never documented?" Commander HFY's large black eyes narrowed. "You will state your point, human. Ethereal wanderers. Never seen one. Never seen evidence of one. Never even seen a consistent description of what one looks like." Marcus had folded his arms. "I think your sacred migration route is a fairy tale." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the wind chimes he'd hung from his workshop eaves tinkling in the breeze. Phillips looked like he might faint. The other two Zephyrians exchanged glances that conveyed entire conversations. Commander HFY spoke finally. "You are challenging the authority of the Empire." "I'm challenging the facts," Marcus replied. Big difference. That confrontation had ended with the Zephyrians departing, but Marcus knew they'd be back. What he hadn't expected was how quickly word would spread, or how many other humans across the galaxy would start asking the same questions. Now, 3 years later, Marcus finished his coffee and walked to his workshop. The communication array he'd built from salvaged ship parts crackled to life as it did every morning at exactly 0800 local time. Messages flooded in from across human space. "Marcus, this is Captain Rodriguez on the transport ship Esperanza. Just wanted to update you on the situation in the Tau Ceti system. 3 more agricultural colonies have declared independence from Zephyrian oversight. Chun, Commander Williams here. The Senate's finally agreed to review Treaty 447B. Your documentation package was instrumental in getting their attention. Uncle Marcus. This voice was younger, brighter. His grandniece Sarah, now a xenobiologist stationed on Europa. The research team here has confirmed your findings. We've analyzed 17 sacred sites across Zephyrian space. No traces of any energy beings, no residual electromagnetic signatures, nothing. You were right. Marcus smiled as he began his daily routine of equipment checks. Being right wasn't the point, though. The point was what came next. He walked to the far end of his workshop where a large map of local space dominated one wall. Red pins marked known Zephyrian patrol routes. Blue pins showed human settlements that had been evacuated over the past 3 centuries. Green pins marked the growing number of colonies that were refusing to relocate. The pattern was becoming clear. The Zephyrians had used the myth of the ethereal wanderers to keep humans from settling the most fertile, resource-rich worlds in this sector. Worlds that just happened to be perfect for Zephyrian agricultural needs. Marcus had stumbled onto the greatest con job in galactic history, and he'd done it by simply staying put. His computer chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The signal was heavily encrypted, bouncing through multiple relay stations. When the static cleared, Marcus found himself looking at Admiral Sarah Chinokafor, his grandniece, now wearing the uniform of the United Earth Defense Force. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her expression serious. "I have news. The Empire has issued an ultimatum. You have 72 hours to evacuate, or they'll remove you by force." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd been expecting this. How many ships? A full battle group. 12 vessels, including the dreadnought, Eternal Harmony. They're not taking chances this time. And our response? Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. The Fifth Fleet left Earth orbit 6 hours ago. Admiral Park's orders are simple: protect human sovereignty and ensure the safe continuation of agricultural operations in the Kepler 442 system. That's a fancy way of saying they're coming to defend my farm. Your farm started a revolution, Marcus. Every human colony that's ever been relocated is demanding answers. The Senate's declared the Ethereal Wanderer Treaties null and void. We're not backing down. Marcus looked out his workshop window at the valley that had become the center of a galactic storm. In the distance, his automated harvesters were beginning their daily work, gathering the grain that fed a dozen human settlements. Alien grain, grown in alien soil, under alien suns, but tended by human hands and human ingenuity. "Tell Admiral Park he's welcome to dock his ships in the lower field," Marcus said. "But warn him about the irrigation ditches. I just finished the spring maintenance, and I'd hate to see a dreadnought stuck in the mud." Sarah laughed, the sound crackling through the transmission. "Copy that. And Marcus? The whole galaxy is watching. Whatever happens here in the next few days is going to determine whether humanity gets to keep the stars we've claimed, or whether we go back to being tenant farmers in someone else's empire." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with the sound of the wind and the distant hum of his machines. He walked back to his porch and sat in the rocking chair he'd carved from native bluewood 30 years ago. In 72 hours, this quiet valley would become a battleground. The most powerful empire in the galaxy would arrive with enough firepower to glass the planet, and they'd be met by human ships crewed by people who had finally decided they'd been pushed around long enough. All because one draft dodger had refused to move. Marcus began to rock slowly, watching his field sway in the morning breeze. He'd come here running from one war, and now he'd started another. The irony wasn't lost on him. But this time, he wasn't running anywhere. The first human ships arrived at dawn on the second day, their hulls gleaming like silver teardrops against the purple sky. Marcus watched from his porch as Admiral Park's flagship, the UES Defiant, settled into the lower field with surprising grace for something the size of a city block. The massive vessel's landing thrusters scorched perfect circles in his carefully maintained grass, but Marcus found he didn't mind. Some things were worth a few burn marks. Within hours, his quiet valley transformed into the most important piece of real estate in human space. Prefabricated command centers sprouted like mechanical flowers. Communication arrays reached toward the stars like metal trees. Supply ships landed with clockwork precision, disgorging everything from ammunition to coffee makers. But it was the people that fascinated Marcus most. They came from every human world, every ship in the fleet carrying volunteers who had abandoned their posts, their families, their comfortable lives to be here. Marines from the outer colonies who had grown up on stories of evacuated settlements. Pilots whose grandparents had been forced off worlds like this one. Engineers who had spent their careers building temporary structures because permanence was forbidden. Marcus met them all as they came to pay their respects to the man who had started it all. They called him everything from the first colonist to the grandfather of human independence. He preferred to think of himself as a stubborn old farmer who had simply stayed home. Captain Elena Vasquez was the first to really understand what they were up against. She had arrived with the advanced scouts, a tough woman in her 40s who wore her battle scars like medals. She found Marcus in his workshop on the evening of the first day, studying the same star charts he'd been updating for 3 decades. "Mr. Chun," she said, removing her cap as she entered. "I wanted to thank you personally. What you've done here, it's given us all hope." Marcus looked up from his charts. "What I've done is refuse to move when someone told me to. That's not heroism, Captain. That's just stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing." She moved to the large map on his wall, studying the pattern of pins with professional interest. "Admiral Park asked me to brief you on what we're facing. The Zephyrian battle group is massive. 12 ships, including their newest dreadnought. They outgun us 3-1. But," Captain Vasquez smiled grimly, "but they're used to fighting other empires with similar technology and tactics. They've never faced humans in a real fight. We have some advantages they don't know about." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Such as desperation, for one. Every person in that fleet has a personal stake in this. We're not fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting for the right to exist as something more than second-class citizens." She moved to another section of the map, pointing to a cluster of blue pins. "These are the worlds we've lost over the years. Gliese 667c, Wolf 359b, Kepler 186f. Some of the most beautiful, most fertile planets humans have ever found. All evacuated because of sacred migration routes, or protected religious sites, or environmental sensitivity zones." Marcus nodded slowly. "I ran the numbers years ago. If you plot all the forbidden zones, they cover 90% of the prime agricultural worlds in this sector." "Exactly. It's not about protecting imaginary creatures or respecting alien religion. It's about keeping humans weak and dependent." The workshop fell quiet except for the hum of Marcus's machines. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the growing military camp. Vehicles moving, generators humming, the distant chatter of radio communications. "Captain," Marcus said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why here? Why my little farm? There are bigger settlements, more strategic locations. Why are we making our stand in this particular valley?" Captain Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the fields where Marcus had spent half his life. "Because this is where you proved it was possible," she said. "Every human in the galaxy knows the story now. The man who defied the Empire and lived to tell about it. You didn't just break their law, Mr. Chun. You broke their mystique." The next morning brought visitors of a different sort. Marcus was tending his personal garden, the small plot behind his cabin where he grew vegetables that reminded him of Earth, when his proximity sensors chimed. A small shuttle was approaching, flying under a diplomatic flag. Admiral Park's voice crackled through Marcus's communicator. "Marcus, we've got incoming. Zephyrian delegation. They're requesting permission to land and speak with you directly." Marcus wiped soil from his hands on his work pants. "Permission granted. Tell them to use the North Field." "And Admiral?" "Yes. Keep your weapons powered down but ready. Something tells me this isn't going to be a social visit." The Zephyrian shuttle was a thing of beauty, its hull seeming to shimmer and flow like liquid metal. 3 figures emerged: Commander Thexhai, whom Marcus recognized from their previous encounter, and 2 others he'd never seen before. The new arrivals were different from typical Zephyrians. Older, perhaps, with intricate patterns of silver threading through their natural coloration. Important people. Marcus met them at the edge of his garden, Admiral Park and Captain Vasquez flanking him. The human delegation looked distinctly informal compared to the Zephyrians' elaborate ceremonial robes, but Marcus preferred it that way. "Human Chun," Commander Thexhai said, his wind chime voice carrying a note of tension Marcus hadn't heard before. I present High Arbiter Velthara and Sacred Keeper Neendale of the Imperial Council. High Arbiter Velthara stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder. We have come to offer you terms, human. I'm listening, Marcus replied. The Empire recognizes that mistakes may have been made in the implementation of certain protective protocols. We are prepared to offer compensation for your displacement and assistance in relocating to a more suitable world. Marcus glanced at Admiral Park, who gave the slightest shake of his head. That's generous, Marcus said carefully. What sort of compensation? Sacred Keeper Neendale spoke for the first time. His voice was barely a whisper, yet somehow carried clearly across the garden. A full pardon for your trespass. A Class A agricultural world in the Vega system. Technological assistance to establish your settlement. Protection under Imperial law. And in return, you vacate this world immediately. Your fleet withdraws from this system. Most importantly, Velthara's large eyes fixed on Marcus with unsettling intensity. You publicly acknowledge the validity of Imperial sovereignty and the sacred nature of the migration routes. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Marcus could hear the distant sound of human machinery, the constant background hum of a military operation. Somewhere in the valley, a earthborn crow was calling, one of the few birds that had successfully adapted to the alien environment. No, Marcus said simply. Commander Thexhai stepped closer. You refuse the Empire's generous offer. I refuse to lie. Marcus gestured toward the fields surrounding them. I've lived here for 34 years. I've monitored every electromagnetic frequency, cataloged every seasonal change, documented every environmental fluctuation. There are no ethereal wanderers. There never were. Sacred Keeper Neendale's whisper became sharp as broken glass. You dare claim knowledge of things beyond your comprehension? I claim knowledge of my own land. Marcus shot back. Every grain of soil, every drop of water, every breath of air. If there were energy beings passing through here regularly, I'd have found some trace of them by now. High Arbiter Velthara drew herself up to her full height, nearly 3 meters tall. The Empire has been patient with human expansion, human. We have allowed your species to spread across 100 worlds, to trade in our markets, to benefit from our protection. Do not mistake our tolerance for weakness. Admiral Park stepped forward slightly, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. And don't mistake our gratitude for subservience. Admiral, Marcus said quietly, let me handle this. He looked up at the 3 Zephyrians, these representatives of an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds and claimed dominion over half the galaxy. I have a counteroffer, he said. Velthara's eyes narrowed. Speak. Prove they exist. The ethereal wanderers. Produce one. Show me any evidence at all that they're real. Do that, and I'll not only leave, I'll personally apologize to every human settlement that's been relocated. The sacred migration is not a matter for, or, Marcus continued, cutting off Neendale's whispered protest. Admit that the whole thing is a convenient fiction designed to keep humans from the best agricultural worlds in this sector. The Zephyrians exchanged those complex glances again, silent communication flickering between them. Finally, Velthara spoke. You are making a grave error, human Chun. The Empire's patience has limits. So does human endurance, Admiral Park said firmly. Commander Thexhai activated a small device on his wrist. This conversation is concluded. Human Chun, you have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, the Empire will take whatever steps are necessary to restore order to this region. As the Zephyrians returned to their shuttle, Captain Vasquez moved closer to Marcus. Well, she said quietly, that went about as well as expected. Marcus watched the alien ship rise into the sky, its hull catching the light of the 3 suns. Actually, it went better than I hoped. How do you figure? They came here to negotiate. That means they're worried. Marcus smiled, brushing more soil from his hands. An empire that's held absolute power for 3 centuries doesn't send negotiators to deal with one stubborn farmer unless they think that farmer might actually pose a threat. That night, as the human fleet prepared for battle, Marcus sat on his porch one last time before the storm. The valley was alive with activity, but here in his small garden, surrounded by tomatoes and corn from earth seeds, he found the peace that had drawn him to this place all those years ago. Tomorrow, The most powerful empire in the galaxy would arrive with enough firepower to reduce his farm to radioactive ash. But tonight, the corn was growing, the irrigation system was humming, and somewhere in the distance, that earthborn crow was still calling to its mate. Marcus had chosen his ground, and he was ready to defend it. The Zephyrian battle group dropped out of hyperspace at exactly 0600 local time, their arrival announced by the kind of gravitational disturbance that made Marcus's coffee cup rattle on the table. He stepped onto his porch, cup in hand, and watched a dozen alien warships arrange themselves in perfect formation above his valley. The Eternal Harmony, their flagship dreadnought, was larger than anything Marcus had ever seen. It hung in the sky like a silver moon, its hull reflecting the morning light of 3 suns. Smaller vessels flanked it in precise geometric patterns that spoke of centuries of military tradition and absolute confidence. Admiral Park's voice crackled through Marcus's communicator. "They're hailing us. Standard Imperial protocol. Should I respond?" Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee. After 34 years of quiet mornings, this one felt remarkably similar. "Go ahead, Admiral. Let's hear what they have to say." The communication came through on all frequencies, ensuring that every human in the system would hear it clearly. The voice belonged to Fleet Commander Zwaxthera, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout human space. "Human vessels, you are in violation of Imperial Decree 7742 and Galactic Treaty 447b. You will cease all military operations and withdraw from this system immediately. Any resistance will be met with the full force of the Empire." Admiral Park's response was equally formal, though Marcus detected a note of grim satisfaction in the man's voice. "Imperial Fleet, this is Admiral Chen Park of the United Earth Defense Force. We are engaged in the protection of legitimate human agricultural operations in accordance with the Humanity Expansion Accords. We will not withdraw." Admiral Park, Oexthera's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had never been defied. "You have 30 minutes to begin evacuation procedures. After that time, we will assume hostile intent and respond accordingly." The channel closed, leaving the valley in an eerie quiet broken only by the hum of human military equipment and the distant rumble of spacecraft engines. Marcus walked to his workshop and activated his personal communication array. If this was going to be his last day on the farm, he wanted to spend it properly. The first message was from his grandniece Sarah on Europa. "Marcus, every human world is watching. The Senate has declared you an official hero of humanity. There's even a statue being planned for Central Park." Her image flickered on the small screen, showing a young woman who looked remarkably like his late sister. "I know that's not why you're doing this, but I wanted you to know how much it means to us." The next message made him smile. It was from Dr. Patricia Wong, the xenobiologist who had supervised his original research expedition 34 years ago. She was 93 now, her face lined with age but her eyes still sharp with intelligence. "Marcus, you stubborn fool," she said, her voice crackling through the interstellar relay. "I always knew you'd cause trouble someday. I'm proud of you, boy. Your parents would be proud too. Now stop getting shot at, and come visit me on Luna. I've got some fascinating data about Zephyrian agricultural patterns you should see." But it was the third message that surprised him most. The transmission came through heavily encrypted channels, bouncing through multiple relay stations before reaching his console. When the static cleared, Marcus found himself looking at a Zephyrian face he didn't recognize. "Human Chun," the alien said in heavily accented standard. "I am Subcommander Delvara of the Imperial Science Division. What I am about to tell you could cost me my life." Marcus leaned closer to the screen. This was unexpected. "The ethereal wanderers," Delvara continued, glancing nervously off-screen. "They existed once. 300 years ago, they were real. Energy beings that traveled the migration routes, just as the treaties describe." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Had he been wrong all along? But they vanished, Human Chun. Not gradually, not mysteriously. They were eliminated. The Empire discovered that the Wanderers' energy signatures interfered with our agricultural enhancement technology. So we destroyed them. Every last one. The alien's image flickered as he adjusted something out of view. The migration routes became a convenient fiction to control territorial expansion, particularly human expansion. Your species' agricultural techniques are deficient. Too efficient for Imperial comfort. Marcus sat back in his chair, pieces of a vast puzzle finally clicking into place. I am transmitting historical records, energy readings, and archaeological data that prove what I am telling you. Use this information wisely, human Chun. The Empire has built its power on lies before. Perhaps it is time for truth. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus staring at a screen full of data that would change everything. Archaeological records showing ethereal wanderer remains. Energy readings from their last known migration. Most damning of all, Imperial records detailing their systematic extermination. Marcus uploaded the data to every human ship in the system and began composing a message of his own. But before he could finish, the attack began. The Zephyrians started with a demonstration of power, targeting the empty hillside on the far end of the valley. The particle beam from the Eternal Harmony turned solid rock into molten glass in seconds, the heat washing over Marcus's farm like a furnace wind. The message was clear: surrender now, or this valley becomes a crater. Admiral Park's response was immediate. The human fleet rose from concealed positions behind the mountains, their ships smaller and fewer but moving with deadly purpose. The first salvo of human missiles struck the Zephyrian formation like a swarm of angry wasps, their nuclear warheads blooming against alien shields in flowers of brilliant light. Marcus watched from his porch as the battle unfolded above him, two civilizations hurling their best technology at each other in his sky. Human ships darted between the massive Zephyrian vessels like minnows attacking whales, their tactics chaotic but effective. The aliens had expected a conventional engagement, ship-to-ship combat according to established rules of warfare. Instead, they got Captain Vasquez leading a squadron of fighters through the Eternal Harmony's hangar bay. They got Commander Rodriguez ramming his damaged cruiser into a Zephyrian destroyer. They got Lieutenant Chun, another distant relative, broadcasting Delvara's data on all frequencies while her ship burned around her. The truth about the ethereal wanderers spread across the galaxy in real time, carried by emergency transmissions and news broadcasts. On 100 human worlds, people learned that their ancestors had been relocated not to protect mythical beings, but to hide evidence of genocide. But the Zephyrians still had overwhelming firepower, and they began to use it systematically. The UES Defiant took a direct hit from a plasma cannon, its hull splitting open like an egg. The destroyer Yorktown vanished in a ball of antimatter, taking 300 souls with it. Marcus realized he couldn't just watch anymore. He walked to his workshop and began powering up equipment he hadn't used in decades. Hidden beneath his innocent farming tools was the real reason he'd stayed on this world so long. The original research expedition hadn't just been studying agriculture. They'd been investigating rumors of an ancient weapons cache, technology left behind by a race that had vanished before humans ever reached the stars. Marcus had found it 30 years ago, buried deep beneath his fields. A network of automated defense systems, dormant for millennia but still functional. He'd spent 3 decades studying it, learning its secrets, preparing for a day he'd hoped would never come. Now that day was here. Marcus's fingers flew over controls he'd memorized through years of careful practice. Ancient machinery hummed to life beneath his farm, systems older than human civilization awakening at his command. Energy readings spiked across the valley as weapons that had slept for eons began to charge. The first indication that something had changed came when a Zephyrian cruiser simply vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, gone, as if it had never existed. The alien formation wavered as commanders tried to understand what had happened. The second indication was the beam of pure energy that lanced up from Marcus's cornfield and punched through the Eternal Harmony's main shields like they were made of paper. The dreadnought's hull glowed cherry red where the beam struck, its armor plating beginning to buckle under impossible heat. Marcus activated his communicator, broadcasting on the same frequency Fleet Commander Zoyaxthera had used earlier. Imperial Fleet, this is Marcus Chun. You have 10 seconds to withdraw from this system before I activate the full defensive grid. Impossible, Zoyaxthera's voice crackled back. There are no weapons on that planet capable of. His words were cut off as every Zephyrian ship in the formation found itself targeted by energy signatures their sensors couldn't identify. Ancient weapons, built by a race that had mastered technology the Empire could barely comprehend, tracked each alien vessel with mechanical precision. The beings who built these defenses knew what you did to the ethereal wanderers, Marcus continued calmly. They left a message for anyone who found their weapons. For the protection of refugees, and the punishment of those who make refugees necessary. I think that covers the situation pretty well. Fleet Commander Zaxthera was silent for a long moment. Around him, his fleet was backing away from the planet, their sensors screaming warnings about energy buildups they couldn't possibly defend against. Human Chun, he said finally, what are your terms? Marcus looked out at his fields, where ancient defensive systems hummed quietly beneath rows of alien grain. He thought about his parents, who had wanted him to come home from Vietnam. He thought about all the human families who had been forced from their homes by imperial lies. He thought about Subcommander Delvara, who had risked everything to reveal the truth. Full imperial recognition of human agricultural colonies in this sector, he said. Reparations for all relocated settlements. Most importantly, a formal apology for the genocide of the ethereal wanderers and an end to the lies that justified it. Above the valley, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy waited for its commander's response. Around the galaxy, 1 billion humans held their breath. In his garden behind a simple farmhouse, a 61-year-old man who had once run from war sat in a rocking chair with a cup of coffee, waiting to see if the universe was ready for the truth. The imperial response came 18 hours later, during what Marcus had always considered the most beautiful time of day on Kepler 442b. The three suns were setting in sequence, painting the sky in layers of gold, crimson, and deep purple. Marcus was in his garden, harvesting tomatoes that had taken him 15 years to adapt to the alien soil, when Fleet Commander Zaxthera's transmission arrived. Human Chun. The voice carried none of its earlier arrogance. The Imperial Council has reviewed your requirements. We are prepared to discuss terms. Marcus set down his basket of tomatoes and activated his communicator. Around the valley, human and Zephyrian ships maintained their careful distance, weapons powered but not aimed. The ancient defensive grid hummed quietly beneath his feet, patient as the mountains themselves. I'm listening, Commander. The Empire acknowledges that certain historical inaccuracies may have influenced past policy decisions. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation for any inconvenience these policies may have caused human settlements. Marcus almost smiled at the careful language. Genocide had become historical inaccuracies. Forced relocation was now inconvenience. 3 centuries of systematic oppression had been reduced to a policy matter. That's not good enough, Commander. I want the truth. All of it. Public acknowledgement of what the Empire did to the ethereal wanderers and why. The communication channel remained silent for several minutes. Marcus could picture the frantic conferences taking place aboard the Eternal Harmony, centuries of imperial protocol struggling to adapt to a situation no one had ever imagined possible. Admiral Park's voice crackled through on a private channel. Marcus, we're picking up movement from their fleet. Looks like they're preparing to withdraw. Marcus frowned. That wasn't what he'd expected. All of them. That's the strange part. The main battle group is pulling back, but 3 ships are requesting permission to approach. Small vessels, minimal armament. Their signatures match diplomatic transports. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself hosting the most unlikely gathering in the valley's history. The meeting took place in his workshop, a practical choice given that it was the largest enclosed space on his property. Ancient farming tools shared wall space with star charts and communication equipment, while the floor vibrated almost imperceptibly with the power of sleeping weapon systems. High Arbiter Velthara was there, along with Sacred Keeper Neendale and Subcommander Delvara, whose nervous presence explained a great deal about recent events. But the 4th visitor was a complete surprise, an elderly Zephyrian whose silver skin was marked with intricate patterns that spoke of extreme age and vast authority. I am Eternal Curator Kexthalen, the ancient being said, his voice like whined through crystal caves. I have served the Empire for 460 years. I was present when the Council made the decision to eliminate the ethereal wanderers. The workshop fell silent. Even Admiral Park, who had seen combat in 3 sectors, looked stunned by this admission. Kexthalon moved slowly to Marcus's star chart, his long fingers tracing the migration routes with obvious familiarity. The Wanderers were beautiful, he said quietly. Beings of pure energy who danced between the stars, following currents of cosmic force that we could barely detect. They harmed no one, interfered with nothing. They simply were. Then why? Marcus asked. The curator's large black eyes turned to him. Fear. The Empire had built its power on controlling resources, regulating expansion, maintaining order. The Wanderers represented something we couldn't control or understand. Their energy patterns interfered with our agricultural enhancement technology, yes. But, more than that, they reminded us that the universe contained forces beyond our authority. Sacred Keeper Neendale spoke for the first time since arriving. The decision was made by the Council of that era. Complete elimination of the species, followed by the creation of protective legislation that would serve our territorial interests while appearing to honor their memory. A convenient fiction, High Arbiter Velthara added, her voice heavy with something that might have been shame. We told ourselves we were protecting the galaxy from dangerous energy beings. In truth, we were protecting our power from inconvenient truths. Subcommander Delvara had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he stepped forward. Eternal Curator, I must ask, what is the Council's decision regarding human expansion in this sector? Kexthalon was quiet for a long moment, his ancient face unreadable. Finally, he spoke to Marcus directly. Human Shun, your species has accomplished something remarkable. You have forced an empire to confront its own lies. Few civilizations in galactic history have managed such a feat. I just wanted to keep my farm, Marcus replied honestly. The curator's laugh was like distant chimes. Perhaps that is why you succeeded where others failed. You had no grand agenda, no imperial ambitions. You simply refused to move when ordered to do so. He turned to address the group as a whole. The Council has reached a decision. All protective legislation based on ethereal wanderer migration routes is hereby revoked. Human agricultural colonies may establish permanent settlements on any world in this sector. Full reparations will be made to relocated populations. Admiral Park leaned forward. And the historical record? Will be corrected, Kexthalon said firmly. The truth about the ethereal wanderers will be added to all imperial databases, all historical archives, all educational curricula. The Empire will bear the responsibility for its actions. Marcus felt a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying begin to lift from his shoulders. 34 years of stubborn resistance had finally paid off. But he had one more question. What happens now? Between humans and the Empire, I mean. Velthara exchanged glances with the curator before answering. That depends largely on your species, Mr. Chen. The Empire has learned to respect human determination, but we're uncertain about human intentions. Will you be content with agricultural worlds, or will you seek to challenge imperial authority in other sectors? Marcus walked to his workshop window and looked out at the valley that had become the center of a galactic revolution. Human ships rested peacefully in his fields, their crews probably trading stories with Zephyrian diplomats. Ancient weapons systems hummed quietly beneath the soil, guardian angels he'd never asked for but desperately needed. Speaking only for myself, he said, I have everything I want right here. A place to grow things, a place to watch the sunrise, a place to call home. I think most humans feel the same way. We're not interested in conquering the galaxy. We just want the right to build lives on the planets where we choose to settle. The curator nodded slowly. A reasonable position. Perhaps the Empire and humanity can coexist more successfully in the future. As the diplomatic meeting wound down and the Zephyrian representatives prepared to return to their ships, Marcus found himself alone with Subcommander Delvara. The young alien seemed nervous, constantly glancing toward the door as if expecting Imperial security forces to burst in. Subcommander, Marcus said gently, what will happen to you? You took a significant risk revealing the truth about the Wanderers. Delvara's wind chime voice carried a note of uncertainty. The curator has offered me a position in the Historical Accuracy Division. It seems the Empire has decided it needs officials dedicated to preventing future inaccuracies. That's good news. Perhaps. But I must ask you something, Human Shun. The weapon systems beneath your farm, do you intend to keep them active? Marcus considered the question carefully. The ancient defensive grid represented power beyond anything humans had ever possessed, technology that could shift the balance of galactic politics overnight. In the wrong hands, it could start wars or end them with equal ease. For now, he said finally, not as a threat, but as insurance. The galaxy is a big place, and humans are still newcomers. Having a few guardian angels watching over us seems like prudent planning. Delvara nodded. A wise decision. And the technology itself? Will you share it with your government? Some of it, eventually. The defensive capabilities, certainly. But the real power here isn't in the weapons, Subcommander. It's in the knowledge that they exist. Every empire in the galaxy now knows that humans have access to technology they don't fully understand. That makes us much harder to push around. That evening, as the Zephyrian fleet prepared for departure and human ships began the long journey home, Marcus sat on his porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the three suns set one final time on the most important day of his life. Admiral Park joined him, settling into the spare chair Marcus had built for visitors who never came. Any regrets? The Admiral asked. Marcus thought about it seriously. About staying here? No. About starting a galactic incident? Maybe a few. I never intended for things to get this big. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest decisions, Park said. A young man deciding not to go to war. A farmer choosing not to leave his land. A stubborn old man refusing to move when an empire tells him to. They sat in comfortable silence as the last sun disappeared behind the mountains. Around them, the valley settled into its familiar nighttime rhythms. Irrigation systems hummed quietly. Native creatures began their evening songs. Somewhere in the distance, that earthborn crow called to its mate. Admiral, Marcus said eventually. There's something I should probably mention. The ancient civilization that built these weapons? According to the data I've been able to decode, they didn't just vanish. They transcended, became something beyond physical existence. Park raised an eyebrow. Meaning the weapons grid isn't just automated. It's intelligent, and it's been watching everything that happened here with great interest. Marcus smiled at the Admiral's expression. Don't worry. It approves of humans. Says we reminded of its own creators, stubborn, idealistic, and too dumb to know when we're outmatched. As if summoned by their conversation, a gentle vibration ran through the ground beneath their feet. Not threatening, just acknowledgement. A vast intelligence buried in the planet's core, saying hello to the small humans who had proven worthy of its protection. Well, Admiral Park said after a moment, I suppose that explains why the Zephyrians were so eager to negotiate. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the valley where human and alien crews were sharing their first peaceful evening together in centuries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new opportunities for both species to build something better than what had come before. But tonight, an old farmer sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge in an alien sky, finally, able to call this place home without reservation or fear. The galaxy had learned to respect human determination. More importantly, humanity had learned to respect its own power. And, in a workshop behind a simple farmhouse, ancient weapons systems hummed their approval, guardian angels content to watch over the stubborn species that had reminded the universe what courage looked like. 5 years later, Marcus Chen celebrated his 66th birthday in the most unexpected way possible, hosting the first interspecies agricultural summit in his backyard. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat on folding chairs arranged between his tomato plants and corn rows, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs while discussing soil composition techniques and crop rotation schedules. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. What began as one man's stubborn refusal to move had become a catalyst for change that rippled across the galaxy. The Kepler 442 system was now home to the largest human agricultural colony outside of Earth itself, with over 2 million inhabitants spread across 3 continents. But, more importantly, it had become a symbol of something new, a place where different species could work together instead of simply coexisting under imperial rule. Marcus adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and surveyed the gathering with quiet satisfaction. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the young xenobotanist from New Tokyo, was deep in conversation with horticulturist Veldin of the Zephyrian Agricultural Institute. They were comparing notes on nitrogen fixation in alien soils, their respective species' centuries-old hostility forgotten in the face of shared scientific fascination. Near his workshop, Captain Elena Vasquez, now Governor Vasquez of the Kepler colonies, was discussing security arrangements with Subcommander Delvara, who had indeed taken the position with the Imperial Historical Accuracy Division and had become something of a celebrity for his role in exposing the truth about the ethereal wanderers. But it was the conversation taking place at his kitchen table that made Marcus smile most broadly. His grandniece Sarah, now Dr. Sarah Chinoka, director of Xenological Studies at the University of New Geneva, was interviewing the most unlikely guest of all, Eternal Curator Kexthalan, who had volunteered to serve as the Empire's official representative to the summit. "Curator," Sarah was saying, her recording device humming quietly between them. "In your assessment, how has the revelation about the ethereal wanderers changed Imperial policy toward other species?" The ancient Zephyrian's response came in his characteristic crystal cave whisper. "Dr. Chinoka, I believe your grandfather, granduncle," Sarah corrected with a smile. "Granduncle has taught us something valuable about the difference between authority and legitimacy. The Empire had authority to relocate human settlements, but we lacked legitimacy because our reasons were false. Truth, we have discovered, is the foundation of all legitimate power." Marcus carried a fresh pot of coffee to the table, listening as his family and former enemies discussed philosophy in his kitchen. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had fled one war to avoid killing had ended up starting another war that had led to the most peaceful period in recent galactic history. The summit was scheduled to last 3 days, but already Marcus could see that the real work was happening in the informal conversations. Species that had maintained careful diplomatic distance for centuries were discovering common ground in the practical challenges of growing food on alien worlds. The Rigelian delegate had spent the morning teaching the Zephyrians about hydroponic systems. The representatives from Alpha Centauri were fascinated by the Imperial techniques for managing soil microorganisms. As afternoon approached, Marcus excused himself from the festivities and walked to the far end of his property, where a simple monument now stood. It was made from local stone, carved with names in a dozen different languages. The memorial to the ethereal wanderers had been Kexthalan's idea, but humans from across the galaxy had contributed to its construction. Marcus wasn't alone at the monument. A figure was standing there, translucent and shifting like a heat mirage. He'd been seeing the apparition more frequently over the past year, always in this same spot, always watching him with what might have been curiosity. "Hello," Marcus said quietly, as he always did. For the first time in 5 years, the figure responded. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like wind through empty spaces. "Hello, Marcus-chun." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat, but he kept his expression calm. After everything he'd experienced, a conversation with what might be an ethereal wanderer seemed almost routine. "I was wondering when you'd finally talk to me," he said. "We have been watching, learning. Your species is interesting. We try to be." Marcus gestured toward the summit taking place behind them. "Did we get it right? The memorial?" The figure flickered, became more solid for a moment. Marcus could see features now, androgynous, graceful, definitely not entirely human or Zephyrian. The memorial honors our memory. But, more importantly, the truth honors our existence. We are grateful. I thought your people were extinct. Death and transformation are not the same thing. The Zephyrians destroyed our physical forms, but consciousness finds ways to persist. The being moved closer, its voice taking on warmth. "We have been trying to understand why you stayed. Why you risked everything for a simple farm." Marcus considered the question, just as he had countless times over the years. "I suppose I was tired of running. From war, from responsibility, from making hard choices. This place gave me a chance to plant something instead of destroying it. And now," Marcus looked back at the gathering in his yard, at the representatives of dozens of species working together in ways that would have been impossible just 5 years ago. "Now I think I understand what I was really planting. Not just crops. Hope, maybe. The idea that different people can share the same ground without fighting over it." The wanderer was quiet for a long moment, its form shifting like captured starlight. "The ancient ones who built the weapons beneath your farm, They transcended physical existence as we did. They have been watching as well. They are pleased with humanity's stewardship. Will you stay? Your people, I mean. Will you return to the migration routes? Some of us, perhaps. Others have found new paths to explore. The galaxy is large, and consciousness seeks experience wherever it can be found. The figure began to fade. But we will remember Marcus Chun. We will remember the farmer who refused to move, and the species that chose truth over comfort. As the wanderer disappeared, Marcus found himself alone again with the memorial and his thoughts. He could hear laughter from the summit, the sound of different languages mixing in animated conversation. Somewhere nearby, one of his irrigation systems was running its afternoon cycle, sending water from the mountain springs to fields that would feed thousands of people across dozens of worlds. Governor Vasquez appeared at his side, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The Centauri delegation wants to know if you'd be willing to consult on their terraforming project. Apparently, they've heard about your soil management techniques. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. What did you tell them? That you're a farmer, not a consultant. But that you'd probably be happy to share what you know. She paused, studying his expression. You were talking to something just now, weren't you? Maybe. Hard to tell with ethereal wanderers. They have their own way of communicating. Vasquez nodded as if this was perfectly normal, which, Marcus reflected, it probably was in their current circumstances. Any messages for the rest of us? They said thank you, and that they're proud of what we've built here. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 old friends watching the sunset paint the alien sky in familiar colors. Marcus thought about the young man who had fled Earth in 1969, desperate to escape a war he couldn't understand and wouldn't fight. That boy could never have imagined ending up here, hosting peace talks in a garden on a world no human had ever seen. Elena, Marcus said eventually, do you ever think about how different things might have been if I'd left when the Zephyrians first told me to? Every day, she replied honestly. Human expansion would have stopped at the established colonies. We'd still be tenant farmers in the Empire, growing crops on worlds we could never own. Millions of people would still be living on overcrowded stations instead of building homes on open ground. That's a lot of weight for one decision. Maybe. Or maybe it just proves that the biggest changes often come from the smallest choices. A young man deciding where to make his stand. An old man choosing not to back down. She smiled. Besides, you didn't do this alone. Every human who refused relocation, every ship that came to defend this place, every scientist who helped expose the truth about the Wanderers, they all made their own choices. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Tanaka approached from the direction of the summit. The young scientist was practically glowing with excitement. Mr. Chun, the Zephyrian delegation just confirmed it. They're willing to share their atmospheric processors with human colonies. In exchange, we'll provide them with our crop rotation data and soil restoration techniques. She paused, shaking her head in amazement. 5 years ago, information like that was classified at the highest levels. Now they're offering to trade it for vegetable growing tips. Marcus laughed. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones we think are too simple to matter. As the evening deepened and the summit participants began preparing for dinner, Marcus found himself back on his familiar porch with his familiar cup of coffee. But tonight felt different. Not because of the historic agreements being signed in his living room, or the alien dignitaries discussing trade routes over his kitchen table, or even the ancient weapons systems humming their approval beneath his feet. Tonight felt different because, for the first time in 66 years, Marcus Chin felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The scared young man who had fled Earth's war had found his own battle to fight, and his own victory to claim. The stubborn farmer who had refused to move had discovered that sometimes standing still was the most radical act of all. The accidental revolutionary who had challenged an empire's lies had helped create a truth that would outlast them all. In the distance, the 3 sons of Kepler, 442 set in their familiar sequence, painting the valley in layers of gold and crimson and deep purple. Native creatures began their evening songs, mixing with the voices of humans and aliens sharing stories around dinner tables. Irrigation systems hummed their quiet rhythms, sending water to fields that would feed the galaxy. And, on a porch overlooking the most important farm in human space, an old man rocked slowly in his handmade chair, and watched the first stars appear in an alien sky that had finally become home. The galaxy had learned that humanity would not be moved when they chose to stand firm. More importantly, humanity had learned that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from the simple act of refusing to give up the ground where you chose to plant your life. Marcus finished his coffee and headed inside to join the celebration. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new negotiations, new opportunities for different species to build something better together. But tonight, the farmer who had defied an empire was going to enjoy dinner with his friends and watch his grandniece make history in his living room. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of evening he'd been hoping for when he first decided to stay.